On the Super Bowl edition of the PFF Forecast, we've got a new segment, DGen Nation, Unstable Stat of the Week, another new segment called Rest in Peace. We'll read some questions from Twitter. Big picture deep dive is expected points, of course, the lock of the week, and we finish it out with the sign of the apocalypse. Let's go. All right, before we get started, I should mention that we actually have a real podcast channel on iTunes, so you can go subscribe to it. If you've been listening to this on a different channel, please go subscribe to the PFF Forecast channel, download, and hopefully listen. Maybe send it to your friends as well. And I think we're on Google Play too, so make sure that you do that. Eric, I actually have a surprise for you. You may have caught it in the intro, but I want to start with a totally new segment that I just came up with when we were talking before this, and it's called DGen Nation. Do you have any idea what I might be hinting at?
The fact that your podcast colleague may or may not have bet on some Pro Bowl totals.
Potentially. So DGen Nation, we have a sponsor. It's brought to you by your friend's bookie, whose name you don't know and pays back like 50% of the time. So thank you to them. But yes, DGen Nation is basically, we're going to talk about something where you only bet on it if you're a member of this select group. The Pro Bowl counts. And so I want to know, do you belong to the nation, and what in God's name did you bet on?
Full disclosure, the NFC total was 35 points, and the AFC total was 33 points. And it was Sunday, and there was no real football on, so I really didn't know what to do with my hands, And so, I look at that, I'm like, man, the over under last year was 40, or it was 80 total and 40 for each team. I'm like, gosh, it's a little lower. They don't play any defense in this game. And so, just very Pete Rose, I can't watch a game without having something riding on it ethos there. I laid a little bit on both overs. Neither one, as it were, a hit. So, yep.
I'm sorry. I'll pray for you and hope that you can overcome this. The funny thing about that game, calling it a game, first off, probably a massive overstatement. Every time I would flip to the Pro Bowl, I would see a run play where the running back would just sort of run close to a defender, and then they'd hug and dap it out, and then they'd blow the whistle. It was such a joke.
There were the plays like Doug Baldwin broke a tackle and was busting free for a touchdown, and they blew the whistle way back because the other guy just breathed on him. The best part was I swear they handed the ball to Le'Veon Bell, and he did that 2-step, 3-step thing in the backfield, and they just blew the whistle. They figured he was had somebody around his ankles.
Oh,
and so,
man. So brutal. And that's why I spent as much of my Sunday freaking out about Tiger Woods, missing 3-foot putts and driving the ball into the deep rough every single time. So I'm not sure.
I feel like betting on Tiger Woods at this point would also put you in the world of the next DGen stats.
So in fairness, it is not the Masters yet, though the commercials have started, which makes me very excited. But the Masters isn't here yet, so I have not yet bet on Tiger Woods. I'm sure that time will come, and I can join you in the nation. Let's move on. Unstable stat of the week. This week, we have no sponsor again. It's just an unstable thing. So hopefully we'll get some back. But we're going to now kind of transition into things involving the Super Bowl. And so our unstable stat of the week is just everything to do with ratings and grading of cornerbacks. Can you please elaborate?
Yeah, so we were looking at New England's, top 4 cornerbacks. So, Rowe, Butler, Jones, and Gilmore early in the season, and saw that all of them had allowed a passer rating of over 100 the first 4 weeks of the season into their coverage. And then since then, none of them have allowed more than 100 passer rating into their coverage. And it's just it shows a couple things. It shows how statistic a passer rating is in coverage, because you have, you're talking about a tipped ball here that could have been an interception. If it's an interception, it drops the rating down substantially. If you tackle a guy at the 1 yard line versus tackling him in the end zone, that's a touchdown versus not. So the statistic itself is very unstable. And then what we found is that even things like grades for players in coverage are far less stable season to season and game to game than things like pass rushing or things like run defense. So it's just an unstable thing. And so, in terms of trying to handicap a game like this, it's really one of those things I think that's descriptive of the past, but not predictive of the future.
And that's an important thing to mention, right? When we say unstable, I think some people might be like, oh my God, that's a bad stat. No, it's a descriptive stat, not a predictive stat. So, obviously that's why after 4 weeks, you don't immediately just go, oh, the New England cornerbacks are absolute garbage, get rid of them all. Just something that fluctuates. And so I don't know what that says necessarily about, this game. If I think at all, it just points to the fact that let's go ahead and focus on some things that are more stable and not worry too much about, coverage stats. Seem fair?
Yeah, I think it is. And I think, again, one of the narratives has been that New England has, improved so much defensively, but, a lot of that could be, covering up for players that are a little weaker. Some of that could be genuine improvement, and some of that could just be noise. So I think when we're sort of going into the game like this, as you said, let's focus on the things that are maybe a little bit more predictive.
Agreed. That being said, last unstable stat of 2017. And now, new segment. Very excited about this one. It's called Rest in Peace. What we're doing is we are laying a really overblown narrative to sleep here. So hopefully we can find a nice sponsor here, maybe like a casket company or My Pillow or something like that. Holler at us. Rest in peace. Overblown narrative. This is the thing that I continually hear. I'm not sure if you've heard as well, but RPOs. Apparently the Eagles just run RPOs every single play, run pass options. That's like all they do. Have you heard this?
Yeah, when Peterson's laying on his My Pillow, he's like dreaming about RPOs.
And what's so funny about that is I actually saw, I think Albert Breer tweeted this out, but he asked Peterson about it, and Peterson was like, yeah, it's something that we do. It's a small, actually he said small part of our offense, and he couldn't have been more right. It is a really small part of the offense. I think people just assume that anytime you run play action out of the shotgun, it's a run pass option. But for it to be a run pass option, you actually have to have the option to run the ball, which means you need to run block. So that's a minorly important thing, and it just gets overlooked all the time. So really, the Eagles do run RPOs more than anybody else, but it's still less than 20% of their total play calls, more like 15%. So a really small amount, which, is just, it's not a huge part of their offense. And here's the thing, is when we look at, let me ask you this first. What do you think is going to happen when we look at whether RPOs are plus expected points?
I think it's probably going to be a mixed bag, just like, sort of every other broad category of plays.
Okay, so here's what I found. For Nick Foles on RPOs, and granted this is a pretty small sample obviously, but negative 0.11 expected points added per play, which is not great. In fact, when he didn't use an RPO, just negative 0.04 expected points added per play. So the RPOs, even though it's a small sample, have actually been a little worse. And the interesting thing about that is that actually on throws, whenever they decide to pass out of a run pass option, he's been money. He's 10 for 11, 0.41 expected points added per play, which is ridiculous. So, maybe they should just throw out of them every time. Granted, that's an 11 play sample size. Interesting thing, though.
But is there really an option there, George? Are they throwing out of their own free will in that case?
I don't know if we have nearly enough time to get philosophical, but I like where you're going with that. The other thing, and I think this is another interesting thing to look at, is what about with Wentz? Because, Wentz obviously larger sample size, and he was just, dominant. Wentz, even with RPOs, was actually slightly negative in terms of expected points added, just barely. It's basically a zero play. But without RPOs, much, much better, 0.12. Not necessarily, really what I want to say more so than RPOs being bad is actually that there's just such a small sample size that, hey, like it's not the determining factor in this game, and we should lay that narrative to rest.
But if you like to read about football, please go to profootballfocus.com and read our friend Mike Renier's rendition of how New England can stop the Philadelphia RPO.
Yes, you absolutely should. I believe you get free man bun care tips as well. So make
And
time. Although I'm hearing rumors that man buns potentially no longer in, which means that Mike would actually now be on the cutting edge of the next man bun fad, which will happen in 4 years. So
it's like if you get a PFF Edge subscription, that's the PFF quarterback annual is worth that alone. If you go to profootballfocus.com and simply read the Man Bun Quarterly type material from Renner's pieces, that's worth all the content combined anyway. So you can't lose.
in all fairness, those pieces are great, and if you always want to learn more about football, and I think the RPO is a great example of that. Be a smart watcher of the game of football. Go check those out. By the way, we are just seeing, at least I'm just seeing, and I think this seems to be a valid source, that your beloved Kansas City Chiefs have traded Alex Smith to the Washington Redskins. So I want some quick reaction from you, like 30 seconds. What's running through your mind right now?
I couldn't believe it when I saw it. I think Washington was not a team that I had put on my radar. But yeah, I I was calling for them to between friends. I was calling for them to trade Smith to the Colts in the preseason. So I'm certainly not surprised they've traded Smith. But it is interesting that it's right now, basically a month and a half before free agency starts. So interesting stuff. NFL never takes a break.
Are you currently wearing your Mahomes jersey? Are you like how excited are
You're
you for
assuming I'm wearing
Mahomes?
clothes.
That's fair. I would assume once you found out Mahomes was starting, those probably came off. It's exciting though, and I think it validates your point, right? It's like maybe they should have moved on earlier based on kind of how their season ended. That being said, Alex Smith will always have a kind of a special place in my heart as a Niners fan. I don't know. I kind of just feel
We'll
bad for
finally
him.
get to, now that they're both back in the NFC, we'll finally get to figure out if he or Aaron Rodgers was the best pick from the 2005 draft.
It's definitely not a closed case. There's still potential. All right, next segment that we're going to do, we solicited some questions from the dark web. Really, I just mean Twitter, but it is a deep, dark, terrible place. And instead of reading the mean things that have been commented on our picks column, you decided we should actually read a real question. So, what's the real question that you've chosen here?
Yeah, as much as I'd like to dwell on the fact that we're Wentz haters, Luke Stanky from Slalom Analytics, one of our friends and somebody who tweets, about the NFL relatively frequently, asked us about the success of teams this season on screen passes.
It's a good question. So what we did is we used our expected points model, and I was a little surprised by this. So screen passes this season, slightly more advantageous, better expected points added per play, just by a hair over all other passing plays. Though, interestingly, the spread is also way bigger, a lot more variance team to team, which I think makes some sense. So the best team in terms of adding expected points off of screen passes were the Rams. You think about, some of those huge plays that the Rams got, Todd Gurley going 80 yards, Robert Woods going 80 yards. And then there were some teams like the Bills who just, for whatever reason, could not execute a screen pass very well this season. So a lot of variance in the screen passing game. Overall, it turns out to be a pretty decent play choice. What do you make of that? What are you kind of reading from those numbers?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you said when we were off air, that it's very hard to get sacked on a screen, so you're not going to get a lot of those negative expected points added plays. Incompletions, you're not going to see a lot of those either. You're going to see at least like some positive yardage, I think, on those. Whereas on other passing plays, you do get a decent amount of incompletions, a decent amount of sacks. I also think that the variability is understandable, given that there are fewer screen passes that are thrown than sort of normal pass plays, and to sort of develop a scheme with well constructed screens probably requires coaches that are sort of a little bit above their peers. And so you see a team like the Rams, as you said, with like Sean McVay. I have no difficulty inferring that he's really good at constructing things like screens, whereas some of the other coaches maybe struggle in that area because it's more difficult to develop. So I think that all makes sense. It was a little surprising to me at first that their expected points added was a little higher, but I think all in all, the stats are sort of telling us, I think, reasonable things here.
Also, strong takeaway is that Sean McVay far ahead of NFL coaches in many different respects.
Respect, yeah.
Yeah, much respect. Next thing we're going to talk about, deep dive. By the way, send us more Twitter questions. We'll answer them if they're nice. Please be nice. Big picture discussion. We're going to tackle expected points. This is something that we obviously have mentioned a lot in this podcast, but have mentioned in the past. I think is something that deserves, it gets thrown around a lot, and it would be nice if more people, kind of understood that it wasn't like just witchcraft. So, Eric, I will again take the role of the student. I'm going to pretend I know nothing about it. Give it a go.
Yeah. So first off, expected points is simply just a smoothing procedure that takes what has happened, throughout the history that you're looking at and connects the dots, right? So, for example, if the offensive team has the ball, 1st and 10 from their 20 down on that possession, the points generated from having the ball in that down distance sequence is 7. Right, but not every single time is a team going to score 7 points there. They might punt it, and the opposing team goes on and kicks a field goal, so that might be a -3. They might punt it, get the ball back via a punt, and then kick a field goal. That'd be a 3. And then there are some, obvious situations where the half ends and it's basically a 0 points. And so the idea is that we basically take the average of all of those points generated on those different down and distances, and we use a smoothing procedure, basically a regression, to sort of connect those dots. That's how you get expected points on a particular play. That's kind of how you know that you probably shouldn't take the ball out of the end zone on a kickoff, because the expected points from the 19-yard line where your return is going to go are far less than the 25-yard line where you could have gotten it from taking a knee. And then expected points added is simply, the difference in expected points on your play versus the expected points on the subsequent play. And that's how you measure, basically success on a play. Negative expected points is an unsuccessful play. Positive expected points added is a positive play. And, you sort of go from there. And that's, we can answer a lot of really nice questions with that metric.
Yeah, it's nice because it takes into account the context of the game, right? Which, generally is a hard thing to do, when you look at box score stats, right? It can be a lot of hollow, 5-yard runs, for example. So I think it's really useful, and it's a nicer way, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this makes sense. It's sort of a nicer way of thinking about like probability of scoring, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, right? So if every time you get positive expected points, generally speaking, you are increasing your probability of scoring on that particular possession. Negative expected points decreasing. There are some edge cases that are a little weird. For example, and we've harped on this before. If you get a good play on a third and like a 4-yard play on a 3rd and 5, and your team just doesn't decide to go for it on 4th and 1, then there's a little bit of an issue there, because you go from a positive expected points play to a negative expected points play when you go from going for it to punting. But more. I think morally, what you're saying is correct there. I think, as you said, it just puts context into play. I know I saw a talk by Ron Yurko, he's from the University of Pittsburgh, also a fan of the show. He talked about basically like all these different types of 5-yard runs and what they're worth, right? A 5-yard run from the opposing team's 5-yard line is a touchdown, worth a lot more than a 5-yard run on 3rd and 4, which is worth a lot more than a 5-yard run on 3rd and 15. And again, the box score statistics, as you said, George, they're independent there. They're the same thing, other than the touchdown play, but they're just going to tell you 5 yards. And so to add context there, this expected points added feature is a pretty good place to start.
When Belichick said stats are for losers, I'm so positive that he just meant box score stats are for losers and was, totally clowning everyone everywhere. Because there's no doubt in my mind that Bill Belichick is just playing everyone like a fiddle. He is undoubtedly using data and probably has been using data in a way that is way ahead of everyone else for a while. No doubt in my mind. So
do you get the impression that Bill Belichick, like, let's say 10 years ago, just got bored of knowing football inside and out? And he's like, hey, let's learn some calculus. And then he applied it to he started hiring, was the guy he hired from Tufts to be his machine learning expert or something like that. And it's like, I bet you Bill Belichick's like, while he's on the treadmill, he's just like cranking out neural networks and stuff.
The funny thing is it definitely started with a fairly similar, not definitely, but most likely I feel like started with a similar conversation to the one we just had, which is, man, I know there's context is important here. And when I get these box score statistics, it's just not as meaningful as I want it to be. So I bet one of the first things that he was hoping for is, can we add some context to the plays that players make?
Yeah, and you can certainly see it. I mean, I don't have the stats in front of me, but they certainly make less bad decisions in terms of like running on, weak running downs. They were the first team to start kicking the ball short on the new kickoff rule. They're the first team that I noticed that, the returner stopped taking the ball from out of I mean, they literally, right? I'm assuming, if they change a rule in the next, off season, the Patriots will be the first team to figure out what the optimal play is in that scenario too. It's just, they just have all the angles, all the contexts, fleshed out.
Well done. That was cool. I think you did a nice job. I'm going to give you a B+ there. I thought it was your best explanation thus far. So congratulations.
B+. Okay. Good. Thank you.
We've got to work for that A here. All right. Now the time that we have all been waiting for finally made it. The Super Bowl lock of the week. Bad news. First, the bad news. Bad news is that the computer thinks the line is pretty efficient. Doesn't have a pick on the line. So I'm really sad because you know how much I hate having to take an over here. But I do kind of like this pick, even though at the beginning of the week I was a little anti. But here it is. The lock of the week for the last time in the 2017 NFL season. The over in the Super Bowl currently sits at 48, and we like the over. Eric, first off, thoughts on taking an over as the last lock of the week. Are you okay with it?
Well, seeing how you treated the Detroit-Chicago one, if we're wrong, you're just not going to count it anyway. So that there's sort of like a no risk there. But yeah, I mean, so our number is New England minus 4.6, which is basically where the line is now. But we do have 50 for the total, and so that is 2 points higher than the 48 that's listed right now. I have no issues picking. The season has been about 57% on totals that we've given out to our PFF Elite subscribers. So I'm content with it. I'm going to be rooting for some points.
Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and, as we normally do, let's not break tradition here. Let's go with the counterpoint first. Biggest thing that worries you about a potential low-scoring affair?
Right. So other than New England's, the fact that they've given up 17 or fewer points, I think it's something like every game but 3 since week 4, right? There's this weirdness there. But the Philadelphia defense is legitimately good, right? The Vikings, were an offense that was performing at a relatively high level. They completely shut them down. Atlanta, they held to 10 points. They have a pass rush that, I'm not going to go all the way back to 2007 or 2011, but we've seen historically that pass rushes, especially those that can come from a place like Fletcher Cox, can really disrupt offenses in high leverage games. So, Philadelphia's defense is really something that I worry about when thinking about this over. But I think we have far better reasons to like the over.
Yeah. So mentioning the pass rush, and we talk a lot about how pressure is something that is unstable. But what you have to remember is that if you can sustain pressure throughout a game, even though that's something that is not necessarily easy to predict, if you can do it, right, against Tom Brady, those are dropbacks where he's not kept clean. And he's going to kill you if he's clean. So sustaining that pressure would be the one thing that would worry me. The Eagles are the only team in the NFL with 7 players with 20 or more pressures. So if they can find a way to continue rotating those guys in and not fall the way of the Falcons and the Jaguars, where they just, their pass rush fell off a cliff in the second half, I think that would worry me somewhat. But I think there's a decent amount of evidence to think that the smart play is actually the over. So let's do this. Give me your number one thing that makes you excited about this lock of the week.
Philadelphia Eagles tight end Zach Ertz. I think Zach Ertz has been as poor as he can be as a blocker, has been one of the better receiving tight ends in the league for quite some time now. He, against Harrison Smith last week, who was the best player in the NFL according to PFF, had caught all 4 of his targets for 55 yards. He beat the Vikings underneath on third downs, over the top. For big plays. He was a revelation. And, New England's kind of a middle of the pack team against tight ends. We've seen players like Ed Dickson get over 60 yards against them in the passing game. Even Jesse James, that play that didn't count against Pittsburgh, there was a broken down coverage there. They're, in terms of defensive talent, at the linebacker position, even with like Patrick Chung at safety and everything, it's just a little weaker than you would expect from a team of New England's caliber. So I think Zach Ertz provides a huge edge here for Philadelphia as they try to score enough points to get us over this total.
That's great. I think the Eagles' offense is getting just no one is talking about it, right? All they're talking about is the Eagles' defense, Pat's offense. But I think that's kind of the unsung hero here, is that this offense has actually been really, really good, and they had some growing pains with Nick Foles, but I think we may have seen, some of the potential. Probably not gonna, hang 30 plus, but certainly their floor is a lot higher than the donuts that they kind of rolled out there at the end of the season. The thing that kind of, I'll go the other way here with looking at the Patriots offense, and a couple of things that make me bullish on them is, first off, game flow. I think there's a decent chance, based on what you were talking about, that the Eagles could get out to a lead here, and then all of a sudden you've got the Patriots really kind of working their tails off to score some points, and we've seen that generally is something that they're successful at. And, what the Patriots do is they're able to just find the weakness in the opposing team. Brady has a 100+ passer rating, whether he's targeting running backs, tight ends, or wide receivers. 117.4 pass rating when targeting the slot. Just some evidence to the fact that, look, they'll find your weakness, and then whoever's there, they're going to feed them the ball and make the most of it. And that offensive line for the Patriots played really well against the Jaguars. Really after Gronk got hurt, allowed, I think, just 2 pressures in the last 23 dropbacks. So I think a lot of reasons to think points will be scored.
Yeah, and I think game flow is a huge deal here. Like, you try to think of like all the which been. I think one of the things that probably won't happen is the Eagles get out to a 14-3 lead, let's say, and it just stays there for a few quarters. We didn't see that when Jacksonville did it. We didn't see that when Philadelphia did it against a much weaker Minnesota team. Philadelphia kept the foot on the pedal, and especially when you sort of, and again, this is a trend, but you look at what happened in the last Super Bowl where Atlanta got out to a big lead, New England comes back. That game was 0-0 at halftime, and it still went over 60, or 0-0 at the end of the first quarter, still went over 60. So, I think, even in a game like counterintuitively, I think even in a game that Philadelphia wins, there's still going to be enough points to get over this total because New England is not going to come out of the game without a fight, which is going to include points on their end because offense is their strength. I think if New England gets out to a decent lead, I think their defense is enough of a bend but don't break unit where Philadelphia is going to get enough points to push this over the total. And so, the number of sample paths that in which this game is low scoring, I think far are exceeded by those in which it's high scoring. So that's why we like the pick.
Plus, everyone wants to root for points. So whenever we get a chance to
Right,
root for
right.
points, we got to make it happen.
That's right.
And we're due for a total to hit. Very important things that we need to consider here.
That's a nice segue.
The last thing that I want to mention on the picks front is that we, of course, have our Super Bowl picks column, which is up on the website, profootballfocus.com. And because I couldn't just give you an over, we included some fantastic bets, a parlay in there that you'll love. Definitely go check it out. And then the part that is by far the most important and the bet that you need to know about is the prop bet. Should we give a little tease here?
I think so.
I think it's worth it. So the prop bet that we discovered is an over-under on Tom Brady's significant other appearances. But there's a wrinkle there, so go check it out. You'll want to make sure you go read this. Trust me. Would you say that I'm saying good things? I'm advising you correctly.
Only a couple math nerds can make two better halves, and another half equal one.
That is the best math joke we've had on this podcast, aptly for the Super Bowl. All right.
We finished strong, unlike the Falcons last year in the Super Bowl.
Oh man, I feel the poor Falcons. I feel like that Super Bowl was just a microcosm of this year. Like all of a sudden they realized they were going to win. All of a sudden this year they realized they could win, and
yeah,
taking me back to a brutal season of rooting for the Falcons, man. Anyways, last segment of the 2017 season, aptly named "Sign of the Apocalypse," and so did you read Sports Illustrated growing up?
I did. Yep.
Do you remember this segment called the little piece? I don't remember where it was, but it was like a little thing. It was called "Sign of the Apocalypse."
I do remember that. I don't remember any of them specifically, but yeah, I do remember being entertained by them.
Okay. Well, the idea is it's some crazy, ridiculous thing that could only be a sign of the apocalypse. So here it is. Did you know, first off, I'll start with this. Being a member of DGen Nation, did you bet on the coin flip in the Super Bowl?
No, I'm not betting on props because I'm learning from my Pro Bowl experience. So no, I'm not betting on the coin flip specifically.
Which is a shame because a 50-50 proposition like a coin flip, you can get minus 105, which seems like the most DGen bet you can possibly
As my
make.
father once told me, there's a reason that the casinos are shiny.
Okay, so yes, that's actually a really good one. So here's the sign of the apocalypse. According to OddsShark, 53% of the bets currently on tails, which, well,
they're
sad.
just following the trends, George. Of the 51 Super Bowls, 27 of the coin flips have been tails.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah. So they're they're celebrating Trendsgiving or Trendmas with their fellow friends, man. What would you rather them do?
Well, I'd rather them realize that it's
literally a coin flip.
Here's what needs to happen though is everyone that's listening needs to go bet on heads to even this out so that the apocalypse doesn't come.
That sounds equally as logical as 53% of the population betting on tails.
Oh my gosh, I was stunned. I couldn't believe it.
I can't wait till they start to like offer heads plus 105, and I can just go like contrarian and bet heads, and it actually be a positive EV bet.
Oh man, heads is the underdog. That is what we need.
2017 Philadelphia Eagles. Heads is wearing, interestingly, a dog hat right now.
I think that would be the perfect start to the Super Bowl as they bring out the coin, and on the coin they're like, okay, here's tails, and they flip it over and they're like, here's heads. This is a dog mask. It's like just the face of Lane Johnson wearing a dog mask on heads. That would be perfect. That's how it should end. All right, that is Side of the Apocalypse, and that is the last of the 2017 season for us, unless of course there's like some emergency podcast that we do on Thursday night, since we'll be in Minnesota. So Eric, last time this year,
lock it up.
You lock it up. We'll see you guys on the flip side.